I should have seen it coming when Sarah suggested the Grand Metropolitan Hotel for our annual Thanksgiving dinner. The same Sarah who'd spent the last 5 years reminding me at every family gathering that I was the practical one, not the brilliant one. The same Sarah who'd become a pharmaceutical sales rep and somehow convinced everyone this made her the family success story. "Are you sure you can afford this place, Emma?" she'd asked when making the reservation, her voice dripping with false concern. "I mean, with your little graphic design thing and all." My little graphic design thing. That's what they called the freelance work I'd been doing since college. What they didn't know was that the freelance work had been a cover story for years now. While they assumed I was struggling to make ends meet in my small apartment, I'd been quietly building something else entirely. Something I'd never felt the need to explain or justify to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth much. The Grand Metropolitan was Sarah's choice specifically because she knew it would make me uncomfortable. At least that's what she thought. The hotel was stunning marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and menu prices that made most people's eyes water. Sarah had booked the Thanksgiving dinner in the main dining room, making sure to mention to everyone how generous she was being by paying for such an expensive meal. "Don't worry, Emma," she'd said over the phone. "I've got this covered. I know this kind of place isn't really in your budget." I'd simply said thank you and shown up wearing my usual simple black dress and comfortable flats. Nothing designer, nothing flashy. Just clean and appropriate. But apparently not impressive enough for the Williams family's new standards. Dad had arrived wearing his best suit, the one he'd bought for Sarah's pharmaceutical company award ceremony last year. Mom had on her pearl necklace and kept looking around the dining room like she was afraid someone would ask her to leave. My younger brother Kevin was taking pictures of everything, clearly planning to post about dining at such an upscale establishment. "Can you believe Emma suggested we eat at Denny's originally?" Sarah announced to the table once we were seated, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. I had to explain that we're celebrating as a family, not grabbing a quick bite. I hadn't suggested Denny's. I'd actually suggested we eat at home like we used to when I was younger and Mom would spend 2 days preparing her famous turkey and stuffing. But Sarah had insisted we needed somewhere appropriate for our family's success level. The conversation at dinner followed its predictable pattern. Sarah talked about her pharmaceutical sales numbers, her new BMW lease, and the condo she was looking to buy in the trendy part of town. Kevin shared updates about his marketing job and his plans to propose to his girlfriend at Christmas. Mom and Dad beamed with pride, asking follow-up questions and offering advice. When they turned to me, the energy shifted noticeably. "So Emma," Dad said, cutting his prime rib with deliberate precision, "how's the, what do you call it, graphic design work going?" "It's going well," I replied simply, taking a sip of water. "Staying busy." "Busy with what, exactly?" Sarah pressed, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I mean, what kinds of projects are you working on? Anything we'd recognize." I could have told them about the major corporate rebranding projects, the Fortune 500 companies I'd worked with, or the design awards sitting in my apartment. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Oh, various things. Logos, websites, marketing materials." Sarah exchanged a look with Kevin that I pretended not to notice. It was the same look they'd been giving each other for years, the one that said they were dealing with someone who didn't quite grasp how the real world worked. "Well, that's nice," Mom said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "It's important to have hobbies." "Hobbies?" Kevin laughed. "Mom, Emma thinks this is her career." The table went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that would have sent me running to the bathroom in tears 5 years ago. But I'd learned something important since then. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. I simply continued eating my salmon as if Kevin had commented on the weather. "I mean," Sarah jumped back in, apparently uncomfortable with the silence, "there's nothing wrong with doing design work on the side. But at some point you have to think about stability, right? Real income, benefits, retirement planning." She gestured around the restaurant's opulent dining room. "I'm not trying to be mean, Emma, but look around. This is what success looks like. This is what happens when you make smart career choices." Dad nodded approvingly. "Sarah's right. You're 29 now, Emma. Time to think about getting serious about your future. Maybe we could help you network," Sarah offered, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to recognize. "I know some people in marketing who might be able to get you an entry-level position somewhere. Nothing fancy to start with, but you could work your way up." Entry level. At 29. After running my own business for 7 years. That's very kind, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I appreciate the offer. Kevin was scrolling through his phone while eating, periodically showing the table photos from his Instagram story. Check this out, he said, holding up his screen. Look how fancy this place is. My followers are going to think I'm living the high life. You are living the high life, Sarah corrected. We all are. Well, most of us. She didn't look at me when she said it, but the meaning was clear enough. The conversation drifted to other topics: Kevin's promotion prospects, Sarah's pharmaceutical company's expansion into new markets, Mom and Dad's plans to renovate their kitchen. I contributed when appropriate, asked the right questions, and generally played the role of supportive family member who was appropriately impressed by everyone else's accomplishments. It was when the dessert menus arrived that things took a sharper turn. Oh my God, Sarah gasped, looking at the prices. $14 for chocolate cake? That's insane. The whole meal has been expensive, Mom admitted, looking slightly uncomfortable. Sarah, honey, are you sure you can handle all this? Sarah straightened up, clearly pleased to be positioned as the family's financial savior. Don't worry about it, Mom. When you're successful, you can afford to treat your family well. Right, Emma? She looked directly at me and I could see the challenge in her eyes. This wasn't really about dessert prices. This was about establishing hierarchy. This was about making sure everyone at the table understood exactly where we all stood in the family pecking order. Right, I agreed mildly. I mean, Sarah continued, warming to her theme, you probably couldn't afford to eat here on your own, could you? Be honest. The table went quiet again. Kevin looked up from his phone. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Everyone was waiting for my answer. I could have told them the truth then. I could have explained that I'd eaten at the Grand Metropolitan dozens of times, that I knew the head chef personally, that I had a permanent reservation at the chef's table. I could have mentioned that the hotel's entire visual brand, from the logo to the marketing materials to the website, had been my work. Instead I said, "You're probably right." Sarah's smile was triumphant. I'm not trying to be mean, Emma. I'm just saying it's important to be realistic about where we are in life. Some people are built for success and some people are, well, more practical. More practical, Dad echoed approvingly. That's a good way to put it. Kevin had gone back to his phone, taking pictures of his dessert when it arrived. This is going to get so many likes, he muttered, angling the chocolate soufflé for the best shot. Maybe you should tag the hotel, Sarah suggested. Let people know where the Williams family dines. I watched her pose for Kevin's camera, her arm draped casually over the back of her chair, her smile perfect for social media. The successful pharmaceutical rep treating her family to dinner at the city's most exclusive hotel. The responsible older sister taking care of everyone. Emma, get in the picture, Kevin called. Come on, don't be shy. I started to decline, but Sarah cut me off. Oh, she doesn't like having her picture taken, she explained to Kevin as if I wasn't sitting right there. Probably doesn't want people to know she can't usually afford places like this. The words hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Even Mom looked slightly uncomfortable now. Sarah, she said quietly, that's not very nice. I'm not being mean, Sarah protested. I'm being honest. Emma knows I love her. But part of loving someone is helping them understand reality, right? She turned to me, her expression softening into something that might have looked like genuine concern to an outside observer. Emma, honey, you know I'm just trying to help you, right? Someone needs to tell you these things. You can't even afford to eat here, she continued, her voice getting louder as she warmed to her theme. She pointed at the menu, which was still sitting next to my plate. Look at these prices, Emma. Really look at them. This entree costs more than you probably make in a week with your little design projects. Dad was nodding along now, apparently convinced that this intervention was both necessary and helpful. Sarah's got a point, Emma. Maybe it's time to face some hard truths about your situation. Stop pretending to be successful, Dad added, his voice carrying the authority he'd always used when delivering what he considered important life lessons. It's okay to admit when you're struggling. That's the first step toward making better choices. The entire dining room seemed to go quiet, though I knew it was probably just my imagination. I could feel the weight of their expectations waiting for me to break down, to finally admit they were right, to ask for their help in finding a real job with real security. Instead, I smiled quietly and said, "You're right." It wasn't what they expected. Sarah had been prepared for tears or anger or desperate justification of my choices. Kevin had probably been hoping for some dramatic family conflict he could text his girlfriend about later. Mom and Dad wanted contrition, acknowledgement that their successful children were right to be concerned about their disappointing daughter. My calm agreement seemed to deflate the tension they'd been building. Sarah looked almost disappointed. "Well," she said, clearly struggling to figure out where to go from there. "Good. I mean, that's healthy, Emma. Accepting reality. The first step is admitting you have a problem," Kevin added, apparently unable to resist getting his own dig in. I was about to respond when I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. A man in an impeccably tailored navy suit was approaching our table, walking with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he had something important to say. I recognized him immediately. Marcus Chin, the general manager of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. I'd worked with him for 3 years now, ever since I'd acquired the property. He was brilliant at his job, completely professional, and absolutely devoted to maintaining the hotel's reputation for excellence. He was also walking directly toward our table with the kind of expression that suggested he needed to speak with me about something urgent. The family noticed him approaching. Sarah straightened up, probably assuming he was coming to compliment her on her choice of restaurant or to ask if everything was satisfactory with our meal. Dad adjusted his tie, preparing to receive what he no doubt assumed would be recognition of our table's obvious importance. Marcus reached our table and smiled politely at everyone before turning his attention directly to me. "Ms. Williams, your usual ownership suite is ready," he began, his voice carrying clearly across our small section of the dining room. The words hit the table like a physical force. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Kevin's phone slipped in his hands. Mom and Dad went completely still, their expressions frozen between confusion and dawning realization. Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the sudden silence that had descended over my family. "I apologize for interrupting your meal, but the quarterly reports are ready for your review, and the architect has some questions about the renovation plans for the executive floors. Also, the head chef wanted me to ask if you'd prefer the usual wine selection for tomorrow's board dinner, or if you'd like to review some new options." He paused, glancing around the table with polite interest. "I hope everyone is enjoying their Thanksgiving dinner. Please let me know if there's anything else you need." I looked at my family's faces. Sarah had gone completely pale. Kevin was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. Mom's mouth was slightly open, her expression cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been embarrassment. Dad was the first to find his voice. "I'm sorry," he said to Marcus, "but I think there might be some confusion. You said ownership." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Sir, Ms. Williams owns the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Has for about 3 years now. She's scheduled to review the quarterly financials this evening, but I can certainly reschedule if family time takes precedence." He turned back to me with a smile. "Should I tell the architect you'll meet with him tomorrow morning instead?" The silence at our table was deafening. I could practically feel the shock radiating from my family members as they processed what they'd just heard. The daughter they'd been pitying for her lack of success, the sister they'd been worried about due to her apparent financial struggles, the family member they'd just finished explaining couldn't afford to eat at this restaurant, owned the entire hotel. "Yes," I told Marcus calmly. "Tomorrow morning would be better. And the usual wine selection will be fine for the board dinner." "Excellent," he replied, making a note on the small tablet he carried. "I'll also let housekeeping know you won't need the ownership suite tonight, since you're with family." Ownership suite. The words hung in the air like an expensive perfume. After Marcus walked away, the silence at our table stretched on. And on. And on. Finally, Sarah managed to speak, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Own this hotel?" "Yes," I replied simply, taking a sip of my water. "The whole hotel?" Kevin asked, his phone completely forgotten now. "Yes." Mom was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Emma, honey, how? I mean, when did you?" "About 3 years ago," I confirmed. The previous owners were looking to sell and the numbers made sense. Dad cleared his throat, his businessman instincts apparently kicking in even through his shock. Emma, this must be a multi-million-dollar property. Multi-million is accurate, I agreed. The family exchanged glances around the table. I could see them trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the successful hotel owner sitting in front of them with the struggling graphic designer they'd been condescending to for the past 2 hours. But, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she grasped for some way to make sense of this revelation, your apartment, your clothes, your car, you live like... you don't live like someone who owns hotels. I nodded. I prefer to keep things simple. Simple? Kevin echoed. Emma, you let us think you were broke. I never said I was broke, I replied. You assumed I was broke. The accuracy of that statement settled over the table like dust after an earthquake. I hadn't lied to them, not once. I'd simply allowed them to maintain their assumptions about my life and my success level. When they'd offered to help me network for real jobs, I'd thanked them politely. When they'd worried about my financial stability, I'd acknowledged their concern. When they'd positioned themselves as the successful ones who needed to take care of their struggling sister, I'd let them. Sarah was looking around the dining room now as if seeing it with new eyes. So when you said you couldn't afford to eat here? I didn't say that, I corrected gently. You said I couldn't afford to eat here. I said you were probably right. The distinction was important, and from the expression on Sarah's face, she understood it perfectly. Dad was running calculations in his head, I could tell. Emma, if you own this hotel, what does that make you worth? Comfortable, I replied. Comfortable, he pressed. Emma, this place must generate millions in revenue. It does well, I agreed. Kevin was scrolling frantically through his phone now. Oh my God, he muttered. Emma, you're on some business website here. Williams Hospitality Group. That's you. I nodded. It says you own 4 hotels, he continued, reading from his screen. And a restaurant group. And some kind of resort development company. The business has expanded over the years, I confirmed. Mom was still staring at me. Emma, why didn't you tell us? It was a fair question and one I'd been expecting for 3 years. The answer was complicated but also very simple. Because, I said carefully, you never asked what I actually did for work. You assumed graphic design was my career and I let you assume that. It was easier than explaining something you weren't interested in understanding. Sarah's face was cycling through emotions: shock, embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been hurt. But Emma, we're your family. We should have known. Should you? I asked. When was the last time any of you asked me a genuine question about my work? Not a dismissive comment about my little design thing or my computer hobby, but an actual question about what I do, who I work with, or how my business operates. The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus appeared at our table again, this time carrying a leather folder. Ms. Williams, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but the mayor's office called. They'd like to confirm your availability for the tourism board meeting next Tuesday. Apparently there's been some interest in your downtown development project. He placed the folder next to my plate. Also, Forbes wants to schedule the follow-up interview for the hospitality industry feature. Should I have them call your direct line? Forbes. The word seemed to echo around our table. After Marcus left, Dad found his voice first. Emma, you're being featured in Forbes? It's just a small piece about women in hospitality, I replied. Nothing major. Sarah was staring at the leather folder Marcus had left. What downtown development project? We're converting some old warehouse buildings into a mixed-use complex, I explained. Retail space on the ground level, luxury apartments above. The city's been very supportive. Kevin was back on his phone, apparently researching everything he could find about my business interests. Emma, there's an article here about you from last year. Rising star in luxury hospitality. It says you started with one property and built it into a regional empire. Regional empire is probably too strong, I said. But we've done well. Mom was looking around the dining room again and I could see her processing everything differently now. The expensive decor, the attentive service, the other diners in their designer clothes. This wasn't just a nice restaurant Sarah had splurged on. This was Emma's hotel. Emma's business. Emma's success. I need to ask, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. What you actually make? Roughly. Because I've been sitting here talking about my pharmaceutical sales job like it was some kind of major achievement, and now I find out my little sister owns hotels. The question hung in the air. I could see that the answer mattered to her, that she needed to understand just how dramatically she'd misjudged the situation. Last year, I said carefully, the business generated about $42 million in revenue. Revenue. Not profit but revenue. Even so, the number hit the table like a thunderclap. 42 million, Dad repeated slowly. Revenue, I clarified. Profit margins vary by property and season. But even the clarification didn't diminish the impact. They were looking at me like I was a completely different person than the one who'd sat down to dinner with them 2 hours ago. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her dessert. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Emma, I'm so sorry, she said. The things I said tonight, the way I talked to you, I had no idea. I know, I replied gently. That's why I didn't take it personally. But you should have taken it personally, Kevin interjected. We were being horrible to you. We've been being horrible to you for years. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Emma, honey, can you forgive us? We've been so wrong about everything. I squeezed her hand gently. There's nothing to forgive. You made assumptions based on the information you had. That's normal. No, Dad said firmly. It's not normal. We should have known better. We should have asked better questions. We should have. He trailed off, shaking his head. We should have been better parents. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. Around the table, my family was grappling with a complete reversal of everything they'd believed about our relative positions in life. Sarah, who'd positioned herself as the successful one taking care of her struggling family, was sitting in a hotel owned by the sister she'd been pitying. Kevin, who'd been taking pictures to show off dining at an upscale establishment, had unknowingly been documenting dinner at his sister's business. Mom and Dad, who'd been worried about my financial future, were learning that their daughter was more successful than they'd ever imagined. Marcus appeared one more time, approaching the table with an expression of slight concern. Ms. Williams, I apologize for the interruption, but we've had a situation arise. The Henderson wedding party, you know, the one scheduled for tomorrow? They've just increased their guest count significantly, and we're going to need to move them to the grand ballroom. Should I authorize the additional catering and staffing costs? He paused, glancing around the table. It's about $30,000 in additional expenses, but the client has agreed to cover the full amount. $30,000. For one event change. On a holiday weekend. After I approved the modification and Marcus left, the table fell silent again. The reality of what my life actually looked like was sinking in for my family layer by layer. Emma, Sarah said quietly, why do you live in that small apartment? Why do you dress so simply? If you can afford all this, why do you live like someone who doesn't have money? I finished. Because I learned something important a long time ago. People treat you differently when they know you're successful. They want things from you. They assume things about you. They relate to your money instead of relating to you. I looked around the table at their faces. For 3 years I've gotten to know exactly who you all are when you think I'm struggling. I've seen how you treat someone you perceive as less successful than you. That's been educational. The truth of that statement settled over them like a cold wind. They were realizing that their behavior toward me hadn't been a momentary lapse or a one-time mistake. It had been a pattern sustained over years, based on their assumptions about my worth and my place in the family hierarchy. But Emma, Mom said, we love you. We were trying to help. I know, I replied. And I love all of you too. But love and respect aren't the same thing. You love me, but you didn't respect me. You thought I was someone who needed to be managed and guided and worried about, rather than someone who might have her own path figured out. Dad was nodding slowly. We treated you like a child. You treated me like a failure, I corrected gently. There's a difference. Kevin had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he looked up from his phone with an expression of genuine remorse. Emma, I've been such an ass to you. All those comments about your little projects and your computer hobby. I thought I was being supportive in some weird way, like I was the successful brother helping his struggling sister feel better about her situation. He shook his head. But you didn't need my help. You didn't need any of our help. You were already more successful than any of us, and we were too arrogant to see it. Sarah was crying now, though she was trying to hide it. Emma, I don't know how to process this. I've been so condescending to you. So patronizing. I thought I was the one who'd made it, and you were the one who needed rescuing. You did make it, I told her sincerely. You have a successful career that you've worked hard for. That hasn't changed just because I happen to own hotels. But the way I talked to you, she continued, offering to network for you, suggesting entry-level positions, acting like I was doing you some huge favor by paying for dinner at your own hotel. The irony of that last part wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah had insisted on treating the family to dinner at the Grand Metropolitan to demonstrate her success and generosity, not knowing she was essentially offering to buy me dinner at my own restaurant. Marcus approached the table one final time, this time carrying a bottle of champagne and several glasses. Compliments of the house, he said, beginning to pour. And Ms. Williams, the staff wanted me to tell you that everything has been prepared for tomorrow's board meeting. The presentation materials are ready, and catering has confirmed the menu for the lunch session. He finished pouring and stepped back with a smile. Also, the mayor called personally to thank you for the donation to the Children's Hospital Fund. The check cleared this morning and they're already planning the dedication ceremony. After he left, Dad picked up his champagne glass and looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen from him, genuine pride mixed with deep regret. Emma, he said, I want to propose a toast. To my daughter who built something extraordinary while we were too blind to see it. And to the family we're going to be from now on, one that asks questions instead of making assumptions, one that celebrates success instead of dismissing it, and one that treats each other with the respect we all deserve. Everyone raised their glasses. Sarah was still crying, but she was smiling too. Kevin was shaking his head in amazement. Mom was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. To Emma, Dad continued, and to learning that success comes in many forms, even when we're too foolish to recognize it. We drank the champagne, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually having dinner with my family rather than performing the role of their disappointment. Later, as we were preparing to leave, Sarah pulled me aside. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. I waited. All those times over the years when I offered to help you, when I suggested you needed a real job, when I acted like I was the successful one who had it all figured out, did you think I was being cruel on purpose? I considered the question carefully. No, I said finally. I think you were being human. You saw someone you thought was struggling and you wanted to help. The problem wasn't your intentions, Sarah. The problem was that you never asked what I actually needed. She nodded, wiping away fresh tears. I'm going to be different from now on. We all are. I promise. I hope so, I replied, because I'd like to have a real relationship with all of you. One based on who we actually are, not who we assume each other to be. As we walked through the hotel lobby toward the exit, I noticed my family seeing everything with new eyes. The marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the perfectly uniformed staff. It was all mine. The successful, thriving business they were walking through belonged to the family member they'd been worrying about and condescending to for years. Marcus appeared one last time to wish us a good evening. Ms. Williams, the car service is waiting outside whenever you're ready. And I've arranged for your family's parking fees to be waived, of course. Car service. Another small detail that added to their growing understanding of what my life actually looked like. As we stood outside the hotel saying our goodbyes, Dad pulled me into a tight hug. Emma, he said quietly, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, and I should have said it based on knowing what you'd actually accomplished, not just assuming you needed encouragement. Thank you, I replied. That means a lot. One by one they each hugged me goodbye, and each hug felt different than the ones I'd received from them in years past. These weren't the careful, slightly pitying hugs they gave to their struggling family member. These were the hugs you give to someone you respect and admire. As I watched them drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced with my family in a very long time. Optimism. Maybe things would be different now. Maybe they'd learn to ask questions instead of making assumptions. Maybe they'd treat me like an equal instead of someone who needed their guidance and concern. Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, I was looking forward to finding out. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma, would you have time for coffee this week? I want to learn about what you actually do for work. Really learn, not just pretend to be interested while I wait to give you advice. I smiled and texted back, I'd like that. Maybe family dinners would be different from now on. Maybe they'd finally be dinners between equals, rather than interventions disguised as celebrations. I was looking forward to finding out.